Okay, let's just admit it up front. When we read through books like Exodus and Leviticus, there are certain verses, certain laws that just don't make much sense to us, either as modern people or even as Christians. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. What in the world does that even mean, let alone have to do with us? Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Tuesday, July 29th, 2025. Of the 613 odd laws in the Old Testament, many make perfect sense, and we even enshrine some of them in civil law today. Others, such as laws governing sacrifices, don't seem to apply to us directly, but if we peer closely, we often can see the presence of God's grace in them. But there are other laws that seem so foreign as to appear almost ridiculous to us. But even these often have their purpose, and even though they seem irrelevant, they do have continuing relevance for us today. Let's just select a few of these. From the selection in Leviticus 19, part of which we've already read, comes these more obscure laws. You shall not eat anything with its blood. You shall not practice augury or witchcraft. You shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard. You shall not make any gashes in your flesh for the dead or tattoo any marks upon you. I am the Lord. Oh, okay, we get the witchcraft part. That seems almost unnecessary to point out and enshrine in law, but not rounding the edges of the hair on your temples, marring the edges of your beard, not making gashes in your flesh for the dead, or having any tattoos? People do all of these things today. Okay, maybe not gashing our skin for the dead, and we don't consider them to be violations of holy law. What gives? So one of the bedrock principles of Israel's common life was to refrain from adopting the gods of other nations, or even participating in rituals that came from other religions. Perhaps more than any other of the Ten Commandments, the commandment not to worship other gods or make idols are repeated in different form over and over again. Apparently, boiling young animals in their mother's milk, putting gash marks on one's body, placing tattoos on one's skin, and certain hair and beard styles, these, among other things, were characteristic of the worship practices either of the Egyptians, from whom the Hebrew people were freed, or of the Canaanite people, into whose land the Hebrew people were inserted. Avoiding even the appearance of participating in these foreign practices was important, since adopting other gods could be a gradual, incremental affair. So, what does that have to do with us? Well, we also live in the presence of other religions. In our modern world and in our society, we find it advantageous to maintain polite respect for the traditions and practices of our neighbors of other religions. For example, during the Islamic month of Ramadan, our Muslim neighbors fast during the day, only eating after sunset. And our Jewish neighbors celebrate holidays with which we Christians have only passing familiarity. We can live in the midst of other religions and respect their traditions and practices without adopting them ourselves. Sometimes, though, we find ourselves in situations where the religious practices of other groups almost become default practices in our culture. Granted, Roman Catholicism is merely another branch of the Christian family, but in many parts of the country, including my hometown of San Antonio, schools only served fish for the meat course during lunch on Friday. Even though we Protestants recognize no such prohibition against eating meat on Fridays, we also ended up being governed by Catholic tradition regarding eating only fish on Friday, even in public schools. But there are other religious practices that have found their way into modern culture that if we strictly followed the spirit of these kinds of Old Testament laws, we wouldn't do. Take yoga, for example. Yoga is a spiritual discipline in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. It is designed to help the practitioner attain unity with a universal consciousness by emptying the mind. But many Christian people today find that it is a fine form of physical exercise and even a good way to engage in prayer and meditation. Some Christians, especially in India, forbid practicing yoga because of its close association with other religions. But many churches in America today open their doors to yoga instructors, and many more Christians take regular yoga classes and find it quite helpful. You can see then that the underlying concern in ancient Jewish law regarding mixing Jewish and non-Jewish religious practices still echoes among us today. Does it mean we cannot engage in practices such as yoga or other forms of meditation? Not at all. But it does mean that the concern for worshiping only God is still a vital part of our Christian practice today. Tomorrow, laws about how we treat the poor, the outsider, and the vulnerable. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.